Hello everyone, again I'm Arnold Malibiran, your professor for ACC 204 or Cost Accounting and Controls. And for this video lecture, I will be discussing about accounting for labor. Yan. I'm pretty sure na you're familiar now with labor since we had an overview in our previous video lecture about labor. And for today's discussion, we'll be discussing more on the highlights if the labor is applied on Philippine settings. Ayan. Yan. It is very relevant for us to discuss the local application of labor because we do have some government and mandated by the laws na required contributions both ng employee and ng employer. Yan. And for today's video lecture, allow me to use these handouts. Yan. So, this is based on De Leon's textbook. Yan. Ayun. So, again, for the labor, this one is applicable both in the direct and indirect labor. When we say direct labor, again, as a recap, these are the compensation of those employee or personnel who had an active participation in the production of certain products of a company. Yan. Whereas indirect labor are those compensation of employee who don't participate in the production but contributed in the completion of the product. Yan. And again, so in terms of the highlights on the recording of the payroll of certain manufacturing industry, yeah, normally in large company setup or yung mga multinational companies natin who can afford multiple accountants employed in the company. So we have separate payroll accountant. Ayan. And for the payroll accountant, they are the one responsible in recording in a timely manner and they are the one responsible in verifying the time in and time outs of employees. Ayan. So, yan, recording and timely manner of the recording of the payout. Yan, of every employee of the company. Yan. And usually in yung snapshot natin in terms of the labor, ang nangyayari dyan, a lot of companies have their own monitoring tool or certain system on how they can monitor the time in and time out of certain employees. Ayan. And if it is something related to a certain product, yung naging compensation ng isang employee, yan. So, may other controls din na in place ang mga companies natin. So, normally, as to accounting system setup, so hindi naman siya totally related to accounting system setup kasi usually there is a separate payroll solutions being used by most companies, and particularly for the recording of the time in and time outs kasi we do have biometrics system. Yan. And usually the biometrics are the one being integrated to our payroll solutions. And si payroll solutions, depende na lang kung integrated siya to accounting system. So, ang ginagawa ni payroll solutions dyan, they are capturing all logins and logouts in a biometric system. And after capturing the time in and time outs, normally, there are some payroll solutions that could automate the payroll journal entries. Ayan. And once na ma-automate yung payroll journal entries natin, it is being integrated naman to an accounting system. Yan. So, ganun normally in an accounting system setup na form yung mga journal entries natin related to payroll. And the way to identify if it is related to cost producing or kapag related sa product cost yung certain payroll ng isang empleyado. So, they have cost center na you'll appreciate more dun sa part ng departmentalization of costs natin. Yan. And yun, so for this particular textbook of De Leon, so according to these textbooks, the first step, usually this one is applicable on the manual accounting system setup. Yan. So, yan, nandyan yung recording, the numbers of hours used in total and by job. And that's usually the first procedure in identifying on how to account for the labor costs. And for this particular discussion, you need to remember that the job cost sheet, uh, the job cost sheet discussion natin in our previous video lecture. Ayan. Kasi in the job cost sheet, di ba, we have a separate timekeeping discussion dun sa part na yon. And yon, each labor cost usually in a manual setup, parang meron niyang corresponding document where the accountant could check kung anong work ba yung winork on ng isang employee natin. Yan. And syempre, aside from the number of hours or the login and logouts of a certain employee, it is very relevant to identify the quantity produced by certain workers. Particularly if naka-base on the units of production yung employee payout natin or yung charging ng labor cost natin. Yan. And then yon, very important to analyze these hours na makokolate ng accounting side natin to determine or to properly assess lang din paano dapat yung magiging charging on those accumulated costs. And syempre, if meron tayong mga indirect costs na ma-identify, automatically these indirect costs or mga indirect labor costs natin is directly being charged to a factory overhead accounts and should not be charged directly to the work in process account of the job being completed. And yun, dyan na din papasok sa last step natin yung preparation ng payroll, including yung computation ng magiging payout ng employee, ayan, including na din yung dapat na babayaran ni employer sa mga different government agencies natin, na later on, i-discuss natin sino ba yung mga relevant na government agencies in terms of Philippine settings ng labor costs. Ayan. And yan. So parang meron tayong mga employee master file per each company, and sa employee master file natin, and doon na naka-maintain yung nagiging payout natin to every employee. And syempre yung mga payout natin sa mga employees natin should be aligned with their employee contract. Yan. Ayun. So first, I would like to discuss ano ba yung mga different na compensation plan na available sa mga employees natin. And dyan, we could associate it with wage plans, wherein there are various compensation plan being used by different companies, particularly for multinational companies. Ayan. So first, wage plans that we have in our book is syempre yung hourly rate plan. Ayan. So very relevant na if the company have that capability of charging on an hourly basis yung certain labor costs natin, they could be able to trace more yung mga direct labor natin kasi naka-hourly basis siya. So ang ibig sabihin nito, kung ano yung mga mga productive hours na winork on ng isang personnel directly working on the manufacturing of the product. Yan. So that would be relevant in computing our direct labor costs. Yan. Yan. So again, highlight natin dito, the employee is paid for merely being on the job. And all unproductive hours or idle time should not be considered as directly charged to our direct labor costs. And there are some compensation plan naman na siguro just to share pala no, for the hourly rate plan, based on naging observation ko din on my previous accounts, naging relevant siya mostly for contract-based employee. Yan. When we say contract-based employee, ito yung contract or project-based employee. Ito yung parang may mga certain agency no na nag-hire ng employee, and then yung mga agency yung maghahanap ng work for them kung saan sila i-deploy. And usually kung under agency yan, ang na-observe ko lang na setup is mostly hourly rate yung plan for the employee. And yun, very high on outsourcing of employee yung mga production facility natin. Kasi it's difficult for the company to internally hire yung mga personnel ng production facility natin kasi pag large manufacturing company yung setup natin, it would be high as to capital resource or human capital resources. That's why they need to take leverage on the services of an agency para ma-minimize din nila yung allotted costs in the sourcing or recruitment activities of these employees. Yan. Yun. And then for the piece rate plan, so under a piece rate plan, earnings are calculated by multiplying the employee's output by the rate per piece. So for the piece rate plan, ang keynote natin dito is that output-based siya. Ayan. So lahat ng productive hours, yun yung magiging basis na, hindi productive hours, I mean, lahat yung based on the hourly rate plan of the employee, kung ano yung basic salary niya talaga, you'll get the direct labor by multiplying it to the number of output na maproproduce niya. Yeah. So later on, we'll have some practice problems para mas makita nyo yung application nung sa labor costs natin. Yeah. And for the modified wage plan, may mga companies kasi na mas workable sa kanila yung combination, yung application ng compensation to employees. And it could be a mix of hourly rate or piece rate plan. And as to timing, no, di ko sure kung na-mention dito, pero i-mention ko na din. Yan. As to timing naman of the payout of certain employees, yan, there are some companies that are doing weekly payout. Yan, may weekly payout, may bi-monthly payout, ayan, may monthly payout, yan. And meron din nung 2 times every month, yan. Every quincenas, yan. Yun yung pinaka-usual na setup for the payout of payroll natin. Alright. And then next, it's about controlling labor costs. Sige, share na lang din ako ng inputs, no? Bakit siguro may mga weekly, may every 15th or end of the month or monthly. Yan. So, usually, kapag, yun nga, may mga gantong direct labor consideration, yan, lalo na kapag, yun nga, as mga agency setup, very, parang na-observe ko lang, pero I'm not pretty sure about this, pero na-observe ko, most of those agencies are applying weekly payout to employee. Yan. And then, yun. So, I think mostly on the process manufacturing side naman. I mean, doon sa process costing natin applicable yung weekly. Pero, yun, there are some employees na, there are some agency prefer doing weekly payout. Yeah. And ang pinaka-common talaga is yung every 15th and end of the month. Yeah. Monthly payout, siguro depende na yung mga monthly payout. Kasi yung na-observe ko, yung mga nagma-monthly payout na companies, usually, mga outsourcing companies din. Yan, na mas prefer nila. Ang difference kasi between the weekly, tapos 15th of the month and monthly is that mas madami yung workload for the payroll side ng weekly basis na payout. Kasi parang 4 checks yung gagawin mo doon on a monthly basis. Unlike kapag monthly payout, isang occurrence lang yung payroll natin. Yan. So, yun yung main difference. So, may impact din on how you will utilize the payroll department natin. Ayan. And then yun, our next topic for this discussion is about the controlling labor costs. Ayan. So, technically, it is the company's responsibilities in assessing paano ba nila i-maintain na with accuracy lahat ng timekeeping ng bawat employee natin. That's why, yun nga, na-mention ko kanina yung about sa biometric system. Yan, yung pinaka-best example natin. And I'm not sure if nakakita na kayo ng mga bandy clock. Yan, so may mga ganun ding medyo makalumang setup na merong anong tawag doon? Basta meron parang card, bawat employee, and isushoot nila doon sa bandy clock yung card nila. And automatic na ma-preprint doon kung ano yung time in nila and time out. Yan. I think yung mga clock cards yan. Oo, yung mga clock cards yan. And yun, yung iba naman, systemized na. Meron ng website. Yan. And yun, very relevant din yung timekeeping as to production reports. Yan. So remember the concept nung sa production order na na-share ko sa inyo? Yan. Every production order processed by every manufacturing companies, na mention din doon kung ilan yung talagang specific hours na naalat for the production. And yun, knowing na some companies could identify yung specific length of the production and they have the capability to pinpoint kung ilang hours lang talaga yung parang productive hours ng mga direct labor employee. Yan. So again, ito yung part ng timekeeping natin, no, yung mga na-mention ko. And then for the payroll side, like yung mga accounting side natin, yan, very relevant for them to maintain the payroll records, yan, the employees' earnings records, and the payroll summaries. So yan, it's also a different opportunity in a private sector, no, ng accountancy profession or any accounting related courses. Yan. Ayun. And then yun, for the overview on the accounting for labor costs. And for this one, we just need to identify ano ba yung mga direct labor and indirect labor. Kasi all direct labor are charged to the specific job. Whereas kapag indirect labor siya, dapat charge siya to an overhead account. Yan. And for this particular discussion, allow me to share this sample illustration on how payroll is calculated. Ayan. When it comes to payroll calculation natin, we need to highlight lang din on the different government contributions na mandated for every payroll setup. Yan. And before I discuss the illustration, allow me to jump in on the payroll taxes. Yan. So for the payroll taxes, so we do have three main payroll taxes na binabayaran ng isang employee at ng employer. So, unang-una dyan is yung SSS contribution natin. And next on that is the PhilHealth contribution. And third is the Pag-ibig funds contribution. So, for this particular discussion, allow me to shift my window to my browser. And I just want to share this particular website wherein I find na mas updated yung content or yung updates regarding the accuracy on the computation on the kung ano yung minimum requirement na for the following contributions. Ayan. So for the SSS or the Social Security System, more on ang purpose why we have this kind of contribution is usually for the protection against sickness, accident, death of the employee. Yan. And usually applicable din dito yung minimal pension for the employee once they retire. Yan. Pero very minimal lang. Huwag kayo masyadong expect na very high or very mas sobrang malaki yung makukuha nating contribution once na mag-retire ang isang employee. Pero at least meron, di ba? And then next is about the Pag-ibig funds, which is most commonly known as the HDMF or Home Development Mutual Fund. So this one is applicable naman for the housing loans ng mga empleyado. Wherein once ang isang working individual, not really employee, kasi itong mga contributions na to applicable din siya for self-employed. Kasi pwede tayong voluntarily ang payment for these contributions. And yun, kung pag self-employed naman, wala kang employer na magbabawas nung pambayad mo sa gantong contributions. So you need to contribute voluntarily. Yan. So yung HDMF natin, ang magiging application natin for the HDMF. So we do have this concept called yung mga loans, yung mga ang tawag dito, yung mga low-cost housing natin. Yan. If you're familiar with the term, yan. There are some subdivisions, no, that are developing agricultural areas and turned it into a subdivision that could provide low-cost housing. And ito mga low-cost housing, ito yung pinaka-affordable na housing program ng mga real estate developer. Kasi yan parang usually for this kind of houses, certain individual can avail one house less than a million usually pag mga gantong low cost housing. Pero depende pa rin. Nag-vary talaga siya sa location and sa parang policy na lang din ng mga real estate developer natin. Ayan. And for the low-cost housing kasi, very applicable dyan yung sa HDMF natin. Wherein a member of HDMF could apply easily on housing loan. Yan. May certain requirements lang syempre, pero we won't dig into details on those requirements. Pero yon very applicable for application for that kind of housing loan setup. And for the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation or yung mga PhilHealth na tinatawag natin, ayan, I think you've heard about this in the news lately, no? For the past few months, yan. I won't dig in on the news, pero yon still PhilHealth have that good intention na it is intended to help its members for medical care concerns of their members. Yan. Kasi malaking bawas din in terms of hospitalization bill yung mga PhilHealth na kapag may mga kung member ng PhilHealth yung isang individual, nakakabawas siya. Ayun, yun yung main or mga mandated natin na government contributions. And for this particular discussion, I would like to highlight yung mga updated na tax table for this setup. Yan, for these government contributions na related to our payroll discussion. Yan, so I won't discuss in details or any simulation related to this, pero you should have that experience na when you are in your basic accounting on how to compute for your SSS, PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig, yan, contribution. Yan. Kasi nare-recall ko nung undergrad ako, first year yan din i-discuss eh. Yan. So, dapat alam nyo na yan. Pero yun, for the purpose of this discussion, allow me to present to you the most updated. I'm not sure lang kung nagkaroon pa ng updates this year, pero ito yung nakita ko pinaka-recent. Ayan. So normally, for the SSS contribution, it is being shared by the employee and the employer. ER represents the employer, EE represents the employee. Yan. And then, ano pa ba mga keyword natin dito? Yan, yung easy contribution natin, ito yung mga contribution lang ng employer natin. Na related siya sa pasahod or parang salary ng mismong employer. Yan. Usually applicable to sa mga owners ng companies. Yan. Siyempre, yan yung contribution nila for their own salary. And yun, pag titingnan natin yung SSS contribution table natin, based lang naman yun siya lagi on the range of the compensation. So, depending on the range of the employee. So, for example, let's say 10,000 yung salary ng employee. Kapag 10,000 yung salary ng employee, papasok siya dito sa range na to. Yan. And again, kung employee siya, yung titingnan natin na portion sa SSS contribution table natin is yung part ng employed. Kasi yung other part ng SSS contribution table is related to self-employed. Yan yung mga may own business pero sila yung actively na nagmamanage ng business nila, or mga freelancers like yung mga freelance accountants, sales agents, real estate brokers, financial advisors, yan. Ano pa ba? Basta yung mga freelancers na matatawag natin. Or even yung may mga freelancers na copywriter, yan, yung mga ganong nature ng work. And then, non-working spouse, usually yung mga housewife natin. And then yun, kung 10,000 yung sahod ng isang employee, so mag-fall siya for this, dito sa row na to. Yan, so monthly salary credit is 10,000. And then yun, for the computation on the employer contribution. So, yan, titingnan nyo lang kung magkano yung nakatapat sa row na yun. So, for this one, 800 yung employer contribution dun sa sahod ng isang employee. And syempre, may share dyan yung employee natin. Yan, normally, by half yung employee contribution. And kapag naman sahod ng mga employers natin, so magfo-fall siya na 10 pesos. Fixed yung easy contribution natin. And then yun, may mga different unions, no, just to share, na nagiging deductions din on the payroll. You'll encounter more of it on the actual practice na. Pero yun, may mga labor unions na nabuo na kapag medyo mababa or halos malapit sa minimum wage lang yung sahod ng employee, may certain labor unions na parang naging legalized siya and supported na din ng mga circulars ng government na they will be they will have additional contributions. Yeah. So pag additional contributions yon, additional salary deduction. And yun, may pinupuntahan usually yung labor unions na yun and minsan may mga benefits. Yan. So depende na lang kung saan qualified yung employee. Alright. So yung total contribution natin for a certain organization or certain company per employee, no? Ang titingnan natin dito. So kapag 10,000 yung sahod, yan, employer is amounting to 810, employee amounting to 400. Alright. Okay. So that's it about SSS. And next contribution is about pag-ibig. Ayan. So based on the handouts, nakalagay dyan na 100. Kaya 100 yung nakalagay on the handouts is because yan, it is actually 200 and must be equally shared both by the employer and the employee. And yun, kung yung monthly compensation nagfo-fall below 1.5, yan, syempre mas malaki na yung employer share natin. Kasi yun nga, magkano lang yung 1.5 no on a monthly basis, super liit na niya. So very applicable to mga gantong salary range, like halimbawa mga provinces, yan. Even yung, kasi di ba we have that Kasambahay Act na rin. Yan. Normally naman hindi ganong kalaki rin yung mga sahod ng ilang kasambahays natin. Yan. So, yan. Very applicable na din yung contributions natin for those kind of setup. Ayan, and for the PhilHealth naman, yan. So, based on the range lang din siya ng basic salary natin. Yan. And then, yan. Lalabas din ko na yung monthly premium natin. And, yun, personal share dyan, ito yung tinatawag natin na part din ng employee share natin. And, ito yung employer share natin. Alright, so that's it for the 3 contributions. And going back to my illustrative problem. So for my first problem, assume na may isang employee working in a factory that is earning 30 pesos per hour for an 8-hour day. If called upon to work more than 8 hours in a working day, the company will have to pay overtime premium for hours worked in excess for 8 hours. Yan. Assuming the employees works 12 hours on Monday. So, kung 12 hours yan on Monday, meaning, di ba, may overtime yun? So, may 4 hours siyang overtime. And is paid 50% overtime premium, time and a half. The earnings will be calculated as follows. Yan. So, for this particular problem, so, di ba, working on a regular basis na 8 hours. So, supposedly, kung wala siyang overtime work, ang magiging salary niya for that particular day is amounting to 240 pesos. That's why yung first component ng direct labor natin is associated to the regular hours worked within that day. And that's why we have 240 here. And then next naman is about the basic pay natin for the overtime pay. Yan. And for the computation on the basic pay for the overtime pay, yan, we need to identify ilan ba yung OTRs niya. And yung OTRs niya is mentioned as, hindi naman siya mentioned, pero it is stated na 12 hours yung total work. So definitely 4 hours yung overtime natin. And kung 4 hours yung overtime and 30 yung basic pay for the per hour basis ni employee, that's amounting to 120. Yan, 4 times 30. And yon, yung overtime premium natin, ayan, yun yung ma-charge sa factory overhead ngayon. Ayan. So, normally, no, just to give you a quick set up, anong nangyayari kapag may overtime pay, may holiday, ang tawag dito, night differential, ayan. Usually, ang payroll kasi, hindi sa 1:1 basis kino-compute na. Kung ilang hours ka mag-work sa isang employee, itatimes na lang yun basta to your hourly charge. Yan. So yung mga holidays, yan, may special consideration yung mga yan, yung mga holidays overtime na may additional markup. Yan. And yung mga markup na yon, since kaya naman nag-overtime normally, no, ang isang employee kasi he or she needs to work related to that job. Yan. And that's why yung basic pay for the overtime hours or yung mga special holidays or any hours beyond the normal shift of the employee is still considered as part of the direct labor kasi they've been productive naman for that particular hour. Yan. So ang ina-account lang natin for the overhead is usually yung markup na. Yan. Katulad na yun, yung OT time natin may markup na sinabi ng time and a half. Yan. Ayun, gets niyo ba yun? So normally no, parang 150, parang based on 150% kapag may overtime yan, may mga ganong company policy. Yan. And yun, i-total nyo lang yung direct labor related to the regular working hours na 8 hours. And computein nyo lang yung factory overhead, ay yung hours related to the overtime hours. Yung cost ng labor related to overtime hours, yan, that's 180. And total earnings of the employee for that particular day is amounting to 420. Yan. Okay, and then yon, another assumption with similar given. Assuming that the previously mentioned employees paid a premium of 100%. Yan, 100% on the double time. Earnings would be as follows. So, same computation on the first 8 hours. Yan, yung regular work. And then, ang magkakaroon lang ng difference is the computation of the factory overhead or the overtime premium. Again, for the first problem, ang assumption is that time and a half lang yung overtime premium. Whereas dito, sinabi na yung 100% or yung double time niya na employee. So, kung 30 pesos per hour siya on a regular hour basis, matatimes 2 siya. Yan. So, parang 200% yung magiging pang markup natin for this one. So, yun. That's why we came up with 240 and total earnings would be 480. Yan. Assuming same illustration pa din, no? Yan. And ang problem dito is that hindi pala siya additional problem. Yun lang pala yun. Dalawang assumption lang. Okay? And then yun. Next problem naman is, halimbawa, si Ingrid Manufacturing Company daw pays employees every 2 weeks. Yan. Monday, May 1 is the beginning of a new payroll period. The following payroll summary is prepared by the payroll department forwarded to accounting for recording. Yan. Normally, si payroll employee, no, yung nag-create ng gantong payroll summary. Yan. And yan, in most problems naman no, na ma-encounter nyo on MC-based questionnaires, given naman usually yung mga gantong information ng employee natin. Ayan, so again, remember na we are also talking here about the indirect labor costs and another cost na magkakaroon ng impact with our accounting for labor would be those period costs. And yung mga period costs natin, syempre yung mga salaries ng mga hindi na directly related to our hindi na directly related to the production ng certain product natin. Yeah. And then yun. So for this one, we have a given for the factory workers employees, the sales and admin employee. Yan. And yung total. And with the corresponding withholdings and deductions. Ayan. Yan. So, yun no. Meron tayong withholding tax concept, no? So, kayo na lang yung mag-recap and I'm pretty sure na na-encounter nyo siya on your basic accounting. Yan. Yun, for this particular problem, so una nating i-identify. So na-mention naman no na May 1 to 14 yung payroll period natin. And normally sa 14th, kailangan na nilang magpasahod ng employee. Kung magpapasahod na sila, dapat mag-issue out na sila ng mga payslip ng employee. And upon issuance of the payslip, syempre, di ba, nandun na dapat, kung cash basis, no, usually, nakasama na sa envelope yung sahod ng employee. And for those scenarios na mag-i-issue out na, kasi may certain companies na ito yung pay period. Halimbawa, May 1 to 15. And then, ang payout is like sa after 5 days pa or the day after the 15th. So, depende sa company's policy. Pero for this particular illustrative problem, yan. So, assume natin na sa 14 din, yung payout talaga sa mga employee. Yan. Ayun, kung sa 14 yung payout natin to our employees, yan. So, iganto ko lang, no, para kita nyo. Yan. Kung 14 yung payout natin, technically, we need to debit the related payroll expense. Yan, for this particular payroll transaction and credit to the related payables. Yan. And yung mga credits natin that would compose yung mga related contributions natin, the withholding taxes on payroll, and syempre kung magkano talaga yung magiging payout to the employees. And based on the problem, no, 30,000 yung total compensation natin. Yan. So we need to account in our payroll transaction the whole 30,000, whether it is related to the factory worker or to the admin employees. And yun, based na din sa given, ito yung naging proforma journal entry. Hindi pala proforma, ito na talaga yung entry for the withholdings and deductions. That's why we came up with vouchers payable, or ito na yung mismong payout to employee amounting to 23,709.12, which is also given naman sa computation. Ayan. Very mindful lang kayo no sa mga given numbers sa mga illustrative problem kasi may certain problems mali yung total nila. So kayo nang bahalang dumiskarte pag mga ganun yung mga na-encounter yung problem. Pero usually ewan ko, parang usually naman nado-double check naman yung mga ganung problem. Siguro in some practice exercises baka pag nagre-review kayo may ma-encounter lang kayong ganung problems. And then yun, to record the payment of the net earnings of the employee. Yan. So technically, we need to issue out cash. Yan. We need to have a disbursement related to the payroll. That's why we have a recording of a debit to a vouchers payable and credit to cash. And assuming that the total factory payroll of 10,000 to 10,000, 3,000 daw is indirect labor. Yan. So given naman siya sa problem, sa illustrative problem natin na yung 3,000 daw nung 10,000 natin is indirect labor. Yan. So, kung indirect labor yon, so, ang magiging, yan, di ba yung sa factory workers na sahod natin is amounting to 10,000 and 3,000 of it is related to our indirect labor. That's why it is directly charged to our factory overhead control. And then, syempre, yung 7,000 should be charged to a work in process account. And then yun, yung ating selling and admin, yan, sales and admin employee, syempre dapat period cost natin siya. Since hindi naman siya directly related to the certain job or hindi rin siya related to the production itself. And yun, kumbaga ang nangyari kay payroll, no, kasi in actual work, marami kayong may encounter na ganito na parang naging clearing account lang siya kasi during that day, na-close din naman yung certain account na yun. Katulad ni payroll, dinebit na natin siya doon, credit pa natin dito. Yan. Particularly kapag may accounting system na yung company, yan, nagiging part ng control processes nila yung pagsaset up ng different clearing accounts. Yan, para mas malinis yung kanilang transactions and mas maging automated. Pero if there will be no payroll na, depende siya sa chart of accounts ng company. Pero in normal practice, no, mas maganda yung na-treat pa rin ng mga employee and employer natin Particularly for the employer side, no? Kasi sila naman yung mas may concern with the movement of the costs. So, meron tayong related entry for the payroll. Ayan. And then yung next, yung continuation ng illustrative problem natin. The following schedule provides the information necessary to record the employer's payroll taxes for the period. Again, remember, di ba meron tayong katulad na lang sa SSS natin, yung easy contribution doon. Yan, na related lang siya to the employer's contribution. Kasi we have this kind of contribution dahil each companies, they are considered pa rin naman as legal entity. Kumbaga, meron silang juridical personality and parang individual din sila. Na ang nangyayari dito, ang ginagawang recognition ng mga government agency natin, yan, parang they need to still pay the tax. Yan. Kasi nga, yun nga, parang earning individual yung treatment. Yan. Okay, so going back here, so and when it comes to recording of our employer's payroll taxes, so we have the following entries. So first, given naman na yung factory payroll natin, ito yung i-incur. Yan. Selling and admin, ito yung i-incur na costs. Yan. So for this particular entry, mixed na siya. I think hindi naman natin siya iba-backtrack na kung ano ba yung pinanggalingan ng given na to, pero I think usually mixed na siya, yung solely for employer's contribution, yan, and yung naging employer contribution do sa may hati, yeah, for the employee's payroll, yan. And knowing na hindi naman to related to the payout to a certain employee, yan. So total na siya ng mga government contribution na solely will be borne by the employer. Yan. So yan for the factory overhead control account. Syempre, i-consider lang natin dito na indirect labor costs would be those employer's contribution related to factory payroll. Yan. And the rest would be related to, will be considered as a period cost. Yan. And yun, yung mga related entries natin for the SSS, PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig will also be applied. Yan. Ayun, so much for the illustrative problem. So right now, I wanted to have a quick, siguro, problem, no, on the part ng labor overhead natin. Ayan. So nagkakaroon tayo ng labor overhead. Consider natin yung first scenario dito. Unang-una, pag may waiting time or idle time. Ayan. Normally, yung mga naalat na idle time considered as non-productive hours ng company. That's why it should not be directly charged to a certain engagement, to a certain job. Yan. Kasi unproductive hours natin siya. Yan. So, yun, in a normal setup, no? So, ito yung given natin. Let us assume that Maxine Garcia spent 36 hours on a certain job. And that's job 101. And for this job, ang idle time daw niya is 4 hours. Yan. So, kung 36 hours yung na-spent niya directly on the job, that is considered as our direct labor costs. And yung 4 hours na idle time, yun yung makakonsider natin as indirect labor. So, simply multiplying the provided na direct labor hours and indirect labor hours to the hourly rate of this particular employee. So first, for the direct labor, we have 36 hours times the hourly rate of 50, which will give us 1,800. And yung idle time natin would give us 200. And ito yung computation niya, 4 hours times 50. Okay, and yun, syempre yung sa payroll natin will accrue an amount of 2,000. Yan. So, remember nyo ba yung mga adjusting entries natin? Ayan. So, balikan nyo din siya. Bakit tayo may concept ng accruals? Yan. Okay. So, applicable din naman siya dun sa naging entry kanina for the debit of the payroll and the credit ng payroll. Ayan. So, related din siya on the accrual process. Ayan. Okay. For the make-up pay. So, yung make-up pay naman natin, based siya on the actual units produced ng certain employee. Yan. And dun usually naka-base yung matcha-charge na direct labor costs natin. Yan. Pero for most employee contract, no, hindi naman siya, parang hindi talaga siya As in, kung ilan lang yung na-produce, doon talaga naka-base solely yung kanyang sahod. So, normally naman, given na for your 40 hours basic, parang 40 hours work mo for the whole week, ganito yung magiging rate mo. Yan, mga ganun naman yung setup. So, ito, for the purpose of applying lang yung magiging indirect labor costs natin. Okay, for this particular problem, so it is mentioned here that Maxine Garcia, ayan. So, if si Maxine Garcia pa din to, continuation siya nung first problem natin, with 50 pesos per hour rate. Yan, is paid 15 pesos per piece produced, and during the week, she produced 80 pieces. Ayan. Parang may other contract siguro si Maxine Garcia kay company, no? So, sabi dito, 15 per piece daw yung kanyang rate on a make-up pay basis, and 80 pieces daw yung na-produce na. That's why it's 15 pesos per piece times the number of pieces na produce, which is 80 pieces. And that's why we came up with 1,200, which is a direct charge to our work in process account. And for the overhead account, yan, syempre iba naman talaga yung actual payment to the employee. Kasi di ba kanina I've mentioned na we'll be using pa din kung ano pa yung normal hourly rate niya, which is 50. Yan. So kung 50 yung hourly rate niya, na-mention ba yung hours? Ay, hindi. For this particular problem, sinabi pala yung weekly pay niya na 1.5. Yan. So, if 1.5 yung weekly pay niya, yung magiging variance natin doon or yung difference for the amount na directly charge natin to the work in process account versus the weekly payout, that would be charged to our factory overhead control account. Yan. Or the make-up pay natin. Okay? Yan. Yan, kung 1,000 daw yung guaranteed na weekly pay, yan. So, ang ma-eliminate na entry natin is the factory overhead control account. Kasi, mas malaki yung naging output ni Maxine versus sa kung ano yung weekly pay contract niya. Yan. That's why, since output-based to, naka-base yung direct labor charging natin dun sa actual output niya. Kumbaga yung labor niya is computed based on the actual output. Ayan. And for the overtime premium, ayan. So for this particular problem, no? So, nasan yun? The premium rate for the overtime, ayan, ito pala. For example, if Maxine worked for 45 hours during the week, and she paid time and a half, then entry will be, so yung naging ganito yung entry kasi unang-una, i-compute natin, ano ba, similar to the first problem, no, na kinompute natin, yung, nasan ba yun? Yan, yung dito sa part na to. Parang ito yung magiging application natin. Okay? So, for this particular problem solving, for Maxine's case, na nag-overtime daw, so yung total working hours niya is 45. Yan. Normally, no, 8 hours per day ang regular work natin. And if we are going to compute it on a weekly basis, that's 40 hours. Yan. That's the regular work. And any hours more than that would entail additional cost computation. Hindi na siya mag-align with the normal basic pay computation natin. So, usually may markup na yung mawa-work ng isang employee more than 40 hours. Yan. So, yan, kung educational institution setup to, usually for educational institutions, yan, naka-base sila on the number of units or loads nila. Yan. So kung 30 units lang yung load nila for the week, their payroll will be based on that 30 units regardless of working beyond the normal hours or not. Okay? So yan, for this particular problem, so kung 45 hours yung na-work ni Maxine, and knowing na 50 per hour yung kanyang regular rate per hour, that will give us 2,250. And yun, based on the given na she paid time and a half, then yung magiging charging natin for the overhead rate or doon sa cost ng overtime premium natin, that's 0.5 of her regular rate. So that would give us 25 yung magiging overtime premium natin per hour. And kung 25 yung magiging overtime premium natin per hour, multiply natin yun by the number of overtime hours, which will give us 125. Yan. Then, itotal nyo lang yung dalawa. Okay? Ito, another example here. If overtime results from the requirements of a specific job and not from random scheduling, the overtime premium should be charged to the specific job that caused the overtime. Ayan, so kung naka-specify on the problem na all hours or parang all payout to this employee will be directly charged to the production. Yan. May mga ganun namang company na ang treatment talaga is automatically directly charged to that certain job. Okay. For the shift premium naman, so extra pay to work during less desirable evening shift or night shift. Yan. So yung mga shift premium natin, kasi di ba ang normal shift naman ng isang employee is 8 to 5. Yan. Kung nagwo-work ang isang employee ng mas maaga sa 8, yan, like yung mga pang madaling araw na pasok, yan. Or yung mga night shift natin, yan, usually may mga night shift differential yan. Yan. So may additional premium for them kasi they are working outside the regular working hours natin. And yun, for the shift premium, uh, assume that Maxine is assigned to a night shift daw. Yan. So, for the computation naman nung shift premium natin, given naman dito na meron daw 20 pesos per hour on the shift premium. And the entry for her pay will be, so, di ba kanina na-mention na 40 hours per week yung regular natin. And assuming na yung 50 pesos per hour rate pa din yung maa-apply, so that's 50 times 40 hours, which will give us 2,000 na directly charged as a payout to Maxine. Ayan. And for us to identify ano ba yung factory overhead account natin, so it should be debit to class yung 800 dito. So that would be based on the 20 pesos per hour na given na shift premium times 40. Yan. Which will give us 800. That's why the accrued payroll is amounting to 2,800. Ayan. And syempre yung employers, payroll taxes natin, yan, pag i-remit na to different government agencies, kailangan ma-close out or ma-revert na yung mga na-create natin kanina na payable account. And then yun. Ito, yan, hindi ko na to i-discuss in details, no? I'm sure na very familiar na kayo with the wages, the salaries, and the gross earnings. Ayan. Pero yan, differentiate na lang din, no? For your reference. Yan. Normally, wages based on the actual hours yung sahod nila. Salaries per week or per month. Usually, ito yung mga contract base. Ay, yung mga may employment contract with a certain employer. Yan. Gross earnings, yan. Ito yung compensation natin, including yung mga deductions natin to our employee. Yan. Deductions included yung mga government contribution natin. Yan. And then yun, na-specify lang dito kung ano na yung mga sample ng payroll deductions natin. And actually, that's the end of my video lecture relating to payroll. And if you have any questions to me, class, feel free to message me. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching this video.